And I'd like to introduce our staff. On my far right, Lisa Arroyo is our project engineer. She's my right-hand person for staff work associated with the program. Next to her is Jim Britch, who some of you may know, our utility coordinator. And Jim's a consultant for us, and we've hired him. He's got great expertise in utility work. And next to him is Tom Wagner, and Tom's the Southern California Edison planner on the project. And he and his staff are the ones that have come up with the design. And I'll turn the part of the meeting over to Tom when we'd like him to talk about his design. So today, there will be no formal action taken. So we won't be voting on anything today with regards to the design. We just want to share with you information about the project and about the design. And today's meeting is being videotaped for the public, for those that cannot make it. And many people have let us know they would like to be here today, but they were pleased when we told them that we'd be able to videotape this meeting and to have it made available. So we'll show you also on the slides the website at which this video will be shown on. It is easily found when you go to the city's home webpage, go to departments, and under departments you click on Public Works. On Public Works you click on Engineering, and it's on the engineering page of the website. Okay, so with that, I think we'll get started. So here's an outline of the agenda today. So we've gone through the welcome introductions, and I'd like to do a brief project overview and project status, and then talk about the Underground Utility Assessment District boundary. This boundary is an initial boundary. It's subject to change, and I'll get into some of the ways that the boundary can be changed. I'd like to talk about our project team roles and responsibilities, and you, the neighbors, are part of that team. And so we have staff responsibilities, and there are some neighborhood responsibilities as well. We would like to review the preliminary design. This is a Southern California Edison preliminary design. There are other utilities that are also associated with the project, Cox Cable and Verizon. And the Edison is the lead utility that takes the lead on the design. And so it's from their design that the other utilities work from, because they share the common trench. And that's what makes the project more cost effective, which is to have all the utilities in the same trench. So after the design discussion, then we'd like to move to the next steps of the projects. And then, of course, we'd like to hear any comments or questions. We have a microphone that we can pass around, or you're welcome to come to the podium. So if you have any comments or questions, then we welcome them. And if you don't mind holding off on some of your questions, because I'm hoping that we can answer many of your questions during our presentation. But we welcome them. All right, starting with the project overview and status, back in the November 2005, our City Council approved our program and approved funding for an Underground Utility Assessment District program. And what that meant was that when neighborhoods historically have tried to do undergrounding in the city, they've quickly realized that it's difficult to do it because there is a front-end cost associated with undergrounding utilities. There's a design that is needed to base costs from. And so to get a project off the ground, there's a rather significant cost in the design. And so for private entities or property owners to assemble, get a group together that would front-end the money, that was a challenge. And so what the city's program did was establish a way for which neighborhoods could come to the city and say, can you help us front-end the cost of the program? So with the city program, the city front-ends the cost for the design work, the assessment engineer work, consultant work, and staff work. And so the city pays for those costs up front. Now, if an underground utility assessment district moves forward and ultimately is approved, those costs are added to the project. However, if a project is not approved and you, the property owners, get a vote in whether you would like to have this or not, this program or not in your neighborhood, if the project is not approved, then the city absorbs the cost, and there's absolutely no cost to the property owners if the neighborhood decides that they do not want to proceed with this project. And so this city program has overcome the historical stumbling block of who pays for that cost up front. Well, the city is volunteering to do that. or has volunteered to do that. And so it is a city policy to support undergrounding of utilities when requested by a neighborhood. So we're not telling a neighborhood you shall underground utilities. It's the city is facilitating the forum by which it could happen if the neighborhood wants it to happen. Now, of course, with assessment districts, that means that the cost ultimately would be borne by the property owners. Okay, so the city is assisting with it, but ultimately, if it gets approved, the cost is borne by the property owners. And there are regulations associated with how that can be done. And in the end, the property owners get a vote. And I'll explain that in a little bit, which is, it's called a weighted vote. It's proportional to the benefit. If we've had a project in the Riviera that has come along, and there has been a variation between the benefits, primarily because of ocean views. And you can maybe understand where if poles are in front of property and in the way of their ocean views, their benefit may be greater from those property owners who the poles may be in the rear of their property and don't impact their views. And so there's a proportionality for the benefit. And so the role of the assessment engineer is to determine what is the appropriate assessment proportional to the benefit. Now, in the case of the situation of your Chapala neighborhood, it's more than likely that the benefits will be very close, if not the same, for the property owners, because there is no ocean view from this corridor of Chapala Street or panoramic view. And so it's likely that the assessments would be somewhat closer, if not the same. And it is the job of the assessment engineer to determine those assessments for the property owners. And again, it's proportional to everyone's benefit. So a neighborhood petition was filed, and this neighborhood was fortunate enough to receive approximately 79% support of the people whose names were on the petition to request council initiate this underground utility assessment district. And so the city council authorized hiring the consultants and authorizing that the project be initiated. Again, that doesn't form the underground assessment district. That gets determined at the tail end of the project. I do want to add, too, that no matter what the vote of the neighborhood, it is city council that has the ultimate authority to either approve or not approve, irregardless of the vote. Just want to keep that in mind, because it could be a significant factor. And we're trying to advocate neighborhood harmony and working with people who would really like to have this project and for people who may not be interested in the project and may vote against the project. But it's important to us to keep the neighborhood harmony and have good, healthy discussions, and that's one of the reasons we're having meetings like this today, to have an open forum for people to communicate. And our job as staff is to be that facilitator of the process. Okay, so last year in February of 2008, City Council adopted the resolution to initiate the UUAD. Okay, and Council again authorized the hiring of the assessment engineer, and the city is funding our startup costs. Now, our process or guide for steps in the process can be found in an Underground Utility Assessment District packet that's available online. And so here's that website that I referred to. This recording of this meeting will be found at this website, and it's www.santabarbaraca.gov, and then you go to the government departments and the Public Works and Engineering web pages, where you will find both the packet and information regarding underground utility assessment districts and the recording of this meeting. It also has the recording, I believe, of the November 8th, I believe it was 2008 meeting, in which we had a meeting here in this building at the Gebhardt Room to talk to property owners about neighborhood support thresholds. Now, at our City Council meeting back in November of 2008, Council made it clear that there will be no new regulations imposed on the Chapala neighborhood since it was initiated. So this issue of the neighborhood threshold support Any new regulations that come along would only apply to new underground utility assessment districts, not to the Chapala and not to the Eucalyptus Hill, Eucalyptus Road Association district. So just want to make that clear that there will be no new regulations. There may be some guidelines or some steps that we may add to the process that we believe could benefit the process, like additional meetings, for example. If we would like to have additional meetings to get more information across, say on financing or any topics that maybe the neighborhood would like to talk about, we'd be willing to add more steps to the process if you so choose. But we do have an outline, and we'll go through that, the outline of the steps in the process, so that it becomes clear and transparent as to what information is available to you, and we'd like to get timely and significant information out to you in a timely manner so that you can make decisions along the way. This will be difficult, if not impossible, to read, but this is the flow chart, which is in our packet. And we're at step 10 of the flow chart at this time. This flow chart has 22 steps from beginning to completion of an underground utility assessment district. So we're at the stage where we're talking about the preliminary design, and we've asked the assessment engineer to start working on their assessment engineer's report based on the information provided in the preliminary design. And our next meeting with you as the neighborhood will be to talk about the assessment engineer's report. And we anticipate that to happen in about 2 months or so. So there are many steps in the process. Many of these steps are regulatory steps that are required by our municipal code or by state regulations. And some of these are just good ideas, like the neighborhood meetings and communication forums and noticing of projects. So it's a combination of requirements and procedural steps that we believe are prudent. This slide is our submitted project boundary. Now that is the project boundary that was submitted to council for the initiation of the underground utility assessment district. And the properties identified by the blue dots were the ones in support of the initiating the underground utility assessment district at the time, based on the information that they knew then. And as we move along in the process, some people may change their minds. Some people may become advocates of the project, and some people, because of what they learned through the process, could change their mind and be against the project. And again, everyone's entitled to that opinion. And so it's not a simple majority that would determine whether a project moves forward. Again, it's that weighted vote at the end of the process. Once all costs are known, we would actually have the project bid and costs known before you would need to cast the final vote to determine if you are in favor or not in favor of the project. So know that there are many check-in points along the way where you'll have opportunity to ask the questions, get information, but in the end, you will be able to know that the known costs will be identified before the final vote comes to you. Okay. So again, with regards to the team roles and responsibilities, again with our council resolution, it's a city goal to assist neighborhoods in trying to achieve an undergrounding assessment district. We as staff are okay either way if a neighborhood decides to move forward or not to move forward. We're just facilitating the process. Okay, so again, mentioning our startup costs, and we're trying to provide that information in a timely manner. And I do want to apologize that it's taken us this long to get back to you. We had planned to get back to you in November and have this meeting somewhere in the November time frame, but we had the T fire, you may recall, and that drew our resources to the emergency and the response to the T fire. So this meeting at this time has been delayed primarily because of that, and we strive to be responsive. That's what we want to do. If you have questions, we will try our best to be responsive to you and get information back to you and provide it in a timely way so that you can make at your decision point time frames. And to also facilitate the neighborhood harmony I talked about. The role of the assessment engineer is to determine the proportional benefit. Now, any property that receives what's deemed as being a special benefit, they will be included in the assessment district. I showed you the map. If there are any other properties in the neighborhood that receive a special benefit, they will be included by the assessment engineer into the boundary. Now, a special benefit is a benefit that is a significant benefit to a property owner that the public at large doesn't get. And so there's a limitation to where, for example, if the lines in front of your property or the poles in front of your property are removed, that's deemed a special benefit. Now, if you're a block away, it's up to the assessment engineer to determine if that is a special benefit or not, if those lines are removed from a significant distance away. And that's the role of the assessment engineer, to determine who has a special benefit and who doesn't. So I think it's rather obvious for the ones that have a pole right in front of their yard or a line right in front of the yard that is obstructing either the view or is detrimental to aesthetics. There's shades of gray where the assessment engineer and their expertise and their training and knowledge come into play to determine the special benefits. So you know that we're fortunate to have an assessment engineer hired for this project that has a significant amount of experience. 25 years, is that what I understand? 25 years of experience in the state, and is known as the guru in the business. And so we're fortunate to have that assessment engineer on board, so we have some confidence that we have a quality assessment engineer to help us with this project. Okay, and so the assessment engineer is working on the preliminary assessment report, and as I mentioned before, that is one of the next steps that we will meet and discuss that preliminary assessment engineer's report. The utility companies are part of our team. Again, they were hired by the city, and the Southern California Edison has been the lead in the design. They prepared the design. They also give us a cost estimate to work from. They are familiar with many undergrounding projects, private primarily, that occur in the region and in the Southern California, and so they do have resources to help us with getting estimate figures for the work. And one of their primary jobs is to identify design issues and talk to you about, if the overhead system goes down, a replacement system either has to go underground or some components go on the surface of the ground. The pad mount or transformers or utility vaults, etc., may need to go on the surface. Some are unable to go underground, and so they need to be located in situations for the benefit of the utility companies so that they can operate their equipment safely, but they also have to be spaced or placed in locations that fit. And by that I mean where they fit operationally and where they fit with the neighborhood's participation. So sometimes there'll be utility boxes that need to go places, and the utility companies will work with you as to the placement of the utilities. Okay, another part of our team is our neighborhood. And the neighborhood is the one who initiates the project. The city hasn't gone to your neighborhood and said, can you consider a project? It was really the neighborhood came to the city and said, we'd like to see if we can get a project going. And so a group in the neighborhood has talked to you and has done some organization in the neighborhood to set initial project boundaries. And those are the initial project boundaries that we took to the council, and the council has approved for the initiation of the district. Again, there's ways that the boundaries can change, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I want to stay in the neighborhood, which is the neighborhood representation. So you've had some neighborhood representation to get it to the council level to start the process. And we had initially talked about a steering committee in the neighborhood, and we've gone away from that idea, and we've talked about that at length with our staff and with our director and with the neighborhood. And one of the things that has become important is that even though people are not able to be on a steering committee, they still have a voice because they may end up being assessed in the project. And so it's important for me and for staff to ensure that if decision points are made in the neighborhood, that every property owner be given the opportunity to comment. And so when we have decision points in the process, we would like to go to every property owner and ask the question. We may not get an answer from every property owner back, but at least they be given the opportunity. So we're going away from the steering committee idea as being the voice of the neighborhood. Okay, just so you know, and we feel that that's just a more fair and a transparent way to do business is to give every property owner the opportunity to respond. And so we still welcome any groups of people that would like to talk to us, or to, if you have an issue that you can't resolve with the neighborhood, we're the ones to come to talk to see how we can help get good information out to the neighborhood. So we get a unified neighborhood information sharing level of information out there. Okay? Responding to design issues, we do want to hear back from the public. The last thing we want is to have a project move forward, and then in the very end we have a significant design change that then sends a project back to redesign, costing the project more money. So any of these locations for vaults, or even trenches, or issues that may affect property owners, we're interested in hearing those design issues early in the process as feasible or practical, so that we can make the changes as appropriate and try and come up with the most economical design that we can to keep the project costs to the lowest levels feasible. So we would like your input throughout the process. Okay, this is a map that generally shows the locations of the trench. You can see on Chapala Street, being the middle street in the diagram, that there's this primary line that goes down there. Well, that will be the main trench line through the project. And then you see offshoots from the main line and other trench lines. And I'll have Mr. Wagner explain that a little bit more. But I just wanted to give you an overview of this concept of where lines may end up going. So I think with that, I'll turn this over to Tom Wagner and have him go through give you an overview of the design.
Pardon? Oh, let's see. This fancy machine. Hello, my name is Tom Wagner. I'm a planner for Southern California Edison, as John said, and before we get started, I do want to take a minute to thank John and Lisa and Jim as being part of the team. I've been involved with the city on these underground utility assessment districts from the very beginning, the first one being Farello Road, this one being the third one, Chapala Street. It's an honor and a pleasure. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun to meet some of you and walk the street and get an idea of how we're going to approach this undergrounding project. As you can imagine, the utilities, Edison as well as Verizon and Cox, get several inquiries a week regarding undergrounding existing utility poles for a variety of reasons, but the vast majority of the reason why people want to get rid of the poles is simply for aesthetics, and this is why this project is here, for aesthetics. As John mentioned, the biggest hurdle or stumbling block with these projects is the startup costs. For any undergrounding project, the utilities, first of all, need a boundary, which you have provided us, the city's provided us through you. The second thing that the utilities need is a surveyed map of the entire area. The surveyed map includes the street, the boundaries, the property lines, the footprints of the homes, the existing poles, as well as all of the existing utilities that are underground. And we like to call those the existing wet utilities, water, sewer, and gas, because what we are trying to accomplish is cutting in a developed street with the dry utilities, the electricity and phone and cable. So we need to know where we can go in a fully developed street. As you can imagine, a surveyed map of this area takes quite a bit of money and quite a bit of time. The other thing that we need, as John mentioned, are upfront engineering fees. These projects are traditionally very speculative. The vast majority of these projects really never get off the ground for the surveyed costs and all the other costs. So it's important that the utilities at least get some sort of money for their time and effort just to come up with a preliminary design. As far as getting to this point, which is where we're at, This is all very preliminary, and as John mentioned, Edison is first to design the undergrounding system because we are the highest voltage of the three utilities. We are required to go deeper than phone and cable. So as much as possible to reduce the cost, phone and cable will be on top of us in a common trench. So Edison will be at the bottom, and then a requirement is typically 12 inches of vertical separation between Edison and the other two utilities. Then they have their minimum depth requirements as well. Now the depth of the total trench depends upon what we have to put in the trench. We might have to put in multiple conduits only for Edison. Edison might get by with one or two conduits. Phone and cable might require multiple conduits as well, and that'll be determined in the final design. So here we are, Edison, the preliminary design. We have to take the existing system and essentially bury it. We're trying to mirror or mimic what's already there. And as you walk up Chapala Street, you'll see the lines on the eastern side of Chapala, or the mountain side of Chapala, if you will. And one of the reasons why some of you might think it's very ugly is that there are a lot of power lines going up Chapala. And in fact, this area is somewhat of a corridor between the lower State Street area and the upper State Street area. There are a couple of feeder lines that go up Chapala Street that don't feed your neighborhood at all. One goes from Mission Street all the way to Constance and feeds another neighborhood, another part of town. There's another line that goes up, I think, to Los Olivos and branches off and feeds another area. And then there's another line that comes across Los Olivos. So we have to design burying those as well as feeding your system underground. After Los Olivos, it kind of thins out a little bit, and when you get closer to Constance, it's fairly simple system electrically for Edison. Also, as you walk up the street, we feed our customers with transformers that transform the high voltage into a workable voltage for all of you. Some people call it 110 or 220, but that's what that equipment's for. And there really is one transformer in every block. That's fairly common. It depends on the size of homes and the load and the diversity of the neighborhood. In this particular neighborhood, because of the size of the homes and the diversity, we can get by with one transformer for each block. There is one exception. I think there's two transformers between Padre Street and Los Olivos Street, and one transformer feeds American Avenue. So, in order to underground this system, we have to take this overhead and put them in vaults, conduits, and substructures. And as you see, most of the main feeder lines that go through your neighborhood are going to be, as John mentioned, on the western side of Chapala. And the reason why we chose that location is because it's the best place for us to go, quite frankly. The street's very busy. You have gas and water on the other side of the street. There is a main phone line that is also on the south side of Chapala Street. You might see some of those manholes. It says GTE in the sidewalk on that side of the road. But there is enough room for us to put a trench probably inside the street 3 or 4 feet inside of curb, I guess. And from there, we will feed the vaults that goes right up through Constance. We place the vaults every other block, as you see, because we can pull, it's around 800 feet, I think, or so between the vaults, and we can pull in a straight line the type of equipment and cable we need to pull between those structures. And then to feed your neighborhood, we are coming out of the main line trench into different transformers and smaller boxes, what we call splice boxes, that will probably be placed in the parkway on the west side, or the west side or the south side of Chapala Street. The reason why we chose that side of the street is because most of the homes on the north side of Chapala have retaining walls. The homes on this side of Chapala Street are relatively flat. That's going to reduce your cost and reduce construction time significantly. After the transformers, we will come out of the transformers with secondary lines, 2 small or very small boxes called handholds, 1 by 2 in diameter or 1.5 by 2.5 feet in dimension. And then from there, we're able to provide a stub out or a cap to each property line. That is a requirement for us. So from that point, you will have the ability to pick up those conduits and take them to your house. John mentioned the costs associated with a project like this. We mentioned the startup costs, which will be absorbed if this project goes through into the price of the project. The 3 utilities have their costs: Edison, phone, and cable. You will also be responsible for the excavation of the substructure work. That will be bid out, and you'll get a price, again, absorbed into the cost. The assessment only takes care of these mainline feeders and the caps. So once the assessment is done and the project is in, you as individual homeowners will be responsible for picking up that stub out or cap and digging a trench to your house and undergrounding your service lateral to the house. Typically, you would convert an overhead fed panel into an underground fed panel because the conduits obviously comes from the bottom. That require permits from the city, and they're committed to working with you on that. That's all very simple, but that needs to be included in your total cost for the project. I think that's it. We can get into more detail about the project itself and how we underground Las Rosas and Quinto and all of these, but that's a very basic general overview of how the project is at this point. Please keep in mind that all of the vaults and the transformers and the handholds and the boxes, this is only for Edison. So once we come up with the final plan, Verizon and Cox will put in their substructures, and they will have boxes, typically next to ours. So that'll all be included when you get a final design. I don't want you to be thinking that there's going to be 1 box in a certain location. There'll typically be 3. Not always, but 3.
Some of the people may be wondering, are any structures going to be located on their property? And you do have some indication of some of those structures. I don't mean for us to get into that level of detail right now, but I think at the conclusion of the presentation, and we'd entertain people coming up and asking some questions about their own property and saying, to see if there are some possible transformers or utility boxes being proposed for certain properties.
Well, we can address that, John. That's a good point. Traditionally, Edison designs its system with the vaults in the street because they're very big structures. They wouldn't fit in any yard, and they're traffic rated. You see them all over the downtown area. And the splice boxes and the handholds will typically go in the parkway if there's a parkway in the street, which you do have. Pad mount transformers are typically installed right behind the property line. So in this case, it would be right behind sidewalk. And as you can see, they're sort of centrally located in each block, again, for a reduction of costs. Voltage concerns, we have to serve you a certain quality of voltage. And so if we put in the center of the block, we can serve both ways and get good voltage for everybody. We can reduce our equipment that way, which again reduces your cost. The direction I got from the city, and I agree, is that we try to locate these transformers in an area in which a person has voted for the project. So we didn't want to put it in a yard in which someone voted against the project initially. And I'd be more than happy to meet anyone out there to discuss, the location of the transformer, come up with options, It's something that we have to do to provide you service. And again, the overhead transformers that are there are typically in the middle of the block. Yes?
Could you address about how big that structure is that you're referring to for the transformers that would be located behind sidewalks?
Well, they're on a precast plastic or concrete fiberglass pad of 48 by 54, 4 by 4.5, and they're approximately 3.5 feet tall. Now, the transformer itself is not 48 by 54. It's about a foot less than that dimension. Again, about 3.5 feet tall. We can probably give the folks some pictures or something of those transformers.
I think one of the rather obvious questions that will likely be asked is cost. And so project cost, Tom hit on a couple things, and I'll elaborate on it after the design presentation and more of my presentation, which is there are two primary costs that you'll face. One is the assessment cost for the project, and then there's anyone who doesn't have their service lines to their house undergrounded will be required to underground that. Now, the project cost is the assessment cost is a distribution of the cost amongst all those in the district for the undergrounding of the main line in the street, the removal of the poles, the distribution system in the public right-of-way. So that's the assessment cost portion. Then there's the private property cost portion, which is anyone who currently doesn't have their utility service lines from the street to their house undergrounded. That is a sole private property owner expense. And so that may be concerning to people, and I'd like to bring you some good news later in my presentation about a loan program that I'm proposing for that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But there's two types of costs: the assessment cost, private property cost to underground. And we'll give you some ballpark estimates of that. Going back to this project and the design, we will be fortunate to have another city project go to bid soon to help us with the cost estimating for this project. This project's about 6 blocks. We also have the Cliff Drive Underground District project. It's not an assessment district. It's a slightly different type of undergrounding project, but that is also approximately 6 blocks long on Cliff Drive. And I believe that we'll soon find out what that project will cost, and that'll help us estimate this project. And so that project is estimated at about $4.5 million. I'm hoping that in this economic climate with the competitive bidding that we'll get an excellent bid, and it'll be hopefully significantly less than that, but I don't know that for sure. We are hoping to be out to bid on that project in approximately 1 month. So we will definitely have those bids in hand. Hopefully by the time we meet for the assessment engineer's report, it would be very timely because we could help with those preliminary assessment numbers with those bid results. So we'll hope to have that in hand. So my guesstimate on this project would be a $3 to $4 million range for this project. But that's just purely a guesstimate. I'm not doing a lot of calculation and number crunching. I just want to give you an order of magnitude so that you could do some quick math with 125 property owners. The quick math tells you it's in that $25,000 to $35,000 assessment range or ballpark. So I just want to give you some idea or indication of ranges of costs. Now, going to the laterals or the service connections, some of you may already have your lines undergrounded to the house. And for those who do, there's no additional cost. You'd be done with the assessment cost. So anyone who needs to have their service line undergrounded, they would pay for that cost. And we're going to council on April the 7th to talk about the undergrounding program. I'm going to council and I'm going to ask them to consider a loan for the service cost, a very low interest loan that would be available to all property owners. So there's more details to come on that, and I do need to talk to the council to see if they could support the concept, and if they do, I'd request that we work with the Finance Committee to come up with the details on that loan program. So recognizing these are not the best of times for us to be talking about costs to property owners because of the financial situation and the budget and the economy that we're in, but we're going to try and do what we can to assist property owners who are interested and neighborhoods who are interested in undergrounding. So I wanted to give you some information on that tonight, and I'll give you more details on the upcoming council presentation. But I wanted to go back to the, Jim, you had something too?
I did, John, just on the laterals, and I'd like to, well, Tom, sure, I'd like to address this with Tom, that he has done a preliminary design placing the handhole or the point at what you, as a property owner, would connect to the underground circuit, just based on what he thinks would work for you. However, some people may have a different idea about how they want to make that attachment. And I'm going to give you an example of that, and also stress how important it is that you look at what Tom has designed initially and look at how what that would mean in terms of connecting your lateral that John has addressed, how you would make that kind of connection, whether that would require you to go through a retaining wall or through some the roots of some lemon tree that's precious to you or some other way, because Tom at this point can often move that box to the right or left along your property line to facilitate a better connection point for you. And I'm going to use an example of Mr. Fitzgerald's house. I know I've talked to Art several times about this, and I don't think he'll mind, but Art Fitzgerald lives right here. And I have not looked at this plan in detail, but for example, if Tom had placed his box, his connection box out in this area, I know that Mr. Fitzgerald's house has the meter on a little appendage that sticks out of the Padre or the American Avenue side of his house. And Art may look at that and say, gee, Tom, you put this out in front, that means I'm going to have to come out underneath that wall. I've got to deal with a retaining wall in the front, a couple other issues that would be more difficult. And what I would encourage Art to do is to look at that drawing and then say, can we move, for example, that connection box around to the side here instead of the front? Can we move it around to the side here where I could simply come down behind that little appendage wall that my meter panel is on and shoot straight out to American Avenue and make my connection? Because that would be a shorter, less expensive connection point for that particular property. So one of the things I would encourage you to do before you leave today, and also as you talk to your neighbors, is to look at this. This again is a preliminary design, but this is the time when if there's something that affects your property like that box, it's the time to talk to Mr. Wagner about the possibility of relocating that, moving that, somehow making that more convenient for you to accomplish what you would like to do when you connect your lateral. So.
Well, with that, I walked the street several times, and I've tried to find the existing meter panel locations on each of your homes. So when I designed the stub out, I tried to cap it at the same side of the property that your existing meter panel is in. As Jim mentioned, it doesn't have to be that way. If you do any work on your house, you can move your meter panel. And it would simply mean just moving the stub out to where you want it. This map is very diagrammatic. It's not the Edison plan that I generated. It's a good illustration, and it's very helpful, but the project would be laid out based upon actual utility maps. So we can look at that on an individual basis. That's not a problem. I would like to say, Jim, that not every house has a box in front of your property. There are a couple instances where the box is in front of the neighbor's property in the parkway, and then we went along the parkway 50 or 60 feet and then turned into your property. Again, we want to maximize the use of these structures to reduce the cost and the maintenance of the system. Okay? Do you have any questions about any of your individual properties or anything in general? You're a good crowd.
I did want to also give you an indication of what you can expect for undergrounding your service utility lines. We have actually hired a contractor and had a look at your neighborhood and determined what is a small, medium, large, and I believe the ranges were approximately $4,000 to $7,000, and that is consistent with what we have been told by others in the city that have actually accomplished them when we've had public meetings, and they've told us what their costs have been. And so that's what we are trying to pass on to you, is that's what you can expect. Now, the undergrounding of your service line could possibly be the biggest out-of-pocket expense that you could incur on this project, because the assessment component can be financed over a 20 to 30-year period through the city's financing program. So that $4,000 to $7,000 could possibly be your biggest expense. So considering that is why I've developed the concept of the lateral or the service line loan program that we would fund, or that we would be offering to City Council to offer that to the district to fund the for those that simply that would be a big cost for them to absorb. And so anyway, we'll go into council on April the 7th to talk to council, to broach the subject, and to see if council is of interest. We believe that the underground fund that I manage can absorb that. Okay? All right. Can we move on? Thank you, Tom. This was a copy of the plan that you see in front of you. We thought that was a little busy. More details of each of the lots. So if anyone's interested, we can come back to these and leave them up on the screen, and we can go look at your lots individually if you like. So for the members of the public that are viewing this online, we also offer that they contact Jim Britch and Tom Wagner to set up times for anyone to have their lots and issues looked at. We can have individual meetings, or we prefer to have group meetings if that's possible, just to minimize the duplication and the time. But we'd be happy to meet with people to talk about their individual properties.
So these plans are all online, available online?
This presentation will be made available online.
Detailed line.
So we'll actually be able to put these plans online too, Lisa, I expect. Is that?
I could PDF them.
Yeah, we'll put them online as well, so people can have a look and perhaps enlarge them and look at their lots. And then if they have specific questions, then they can be directed to Mr. Britch or Mr. Wagner as appropriate.
Electronically, can we get a hold of you guys electronically?
Sure. We'll be able to provide them electronically. Is that okay with you, Tom?
The plans?
A copy?
We had something, shoot something off to you.
Sure. So we'll make
Rather than arrange a meeting or anything.
We'll make that available for those who would like to see them. Again, we'll publish them online so that you can actually print them yourself.
With that, I think if there's a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, we might get together and have another meeting with the people that want to have a meeting with us, rather than try to address 125 different opinions, separately. It would be a better design. You're going to absorb this meeting and have some questions after.
Your mic. Tom, your mic. Just to reiterate what Mr. Wagner is saying, that we would be able to try and group discussions if possible. For example, when the next time we meet on assessment engineer's report, I think we could reserve some time in there or add to the agenda that anybody would like to talk about their preliminary design. We can also take advantage of a group meeting to have further discussions. So this isn't the only time that you'll have an opportunity to comment on some of the design. Obviously, the earlier the better for us, because the Cox cable and the Verizon companies are trying to follow as much of the common trench as possible. So if Edison moves, Cox and Verizon moves, and so we don't want to have too many iterations of redesign. So we're looking for significant issues. If you're minor, and I think you can talking with Tom, you'll determine what's more significant than others. Then the significant issues, the big picture or the big structure items would be of importance to talk about. If it's considered a small detail to Tom, he'll work it out to the very end and work with you to the end of the project.
Well, with that, your house is the biggest thing to you. Oh, I realize that. You're thinking about your house and how this project's going to affect your property. So it's important to us. We want to get the big picture down. Be more than happy to speak of any details that you want about your individual properties. That's why we're here. But this is very preliminary. The boundaries that were given to us, we laid out a preliminary design. You can change it, modify it. The important thing is you want to have a successful project. So just keep that in mind as you start absorbing this information. And again, we're here to help.
Okay, moving on with the financing component. I've already spoke to many of these issues. I just want to reiterate that the assessment is the primary component of the project. And there are several options or methods by which that the assessment can be paid. First of all, you can pay for it upfront. If someone is able to pay for that upfront, that could possibly be the most cost-effective way for some people to do that. Now, the city has a program by which we would arrange for financing, and there would be interest charge set by the finance director, and the city would pay for the cost, and you can pay back the city through the city's program. Now, those costs would be 20 to 30-year term and would be added to your property taxes. So that's a second way. A third way is to arrange for your own private financing for those who are able to take advantage of the low interest rates in the market. Perhaps you can get a better rate than the city could offer you. In working with the finance director, he's going to give you the best rate that he can. And again, once you're given the assessment amount, it doesn't change. It doesn't go up. It could possibly go down, but it doesn't go up. He's going to set an interest rate that he has to lock into for the duration of the 20 to 30-year term. Okay? So that's yet another option. For those of you that may be of limited income, either here or viewing, there is a state hardship provision in which if you have a disability, or I believe it's blind, or limited income, and I believe the level now is $35,000, there is a state program that allows the deferment of payment of both property taxes and assessments that can be deferred until transfer of the property. So if someone either moves or if they pass away, then the transfer of the property, that's how the repayment would be made. So that's a state program. But I am also working on a hardship exception for this program. And that's another thing I want to talk to council about, that it, similar to the state program, well, recognizing that it may be a hardship for people, and yet they make over $35,000. To make only $35,000 in Santa Barbara and to have a property in Santa Barbara, there may be people that may have a hardship, a true hardship, that we could understand and acknowledge, and yet they would like to support the project but simply can't afford to pay for it. So I'm working on a hardship exception for the program, and I would expect that to be an exception and that not be made available to everyone, because we do have a program in the city currently that I explained that has that 20 to 30-year term, then you can add it to your property taxes. Okay, in addition to that, for those private service lines, those overhead lines that need to go underground on your private property, again, you can pay them directly, and we're working on the financing of option of a loan, the loan assistance, and we can talk to private individual property owners on the issues that they may have with regards to issues regarding their costs associated with undergrounding their private service lines. So I want to let you know that there are some options available for you, and I'm going to do my best to give you as many options that I can through the program. And that's why I'm looking for hardship provision and for loan assistance and for as many options that I can come up with. So that's work in progress. I want to talk to the City Council on April 7th, and then hopefully if they give me that direction to continue on, then make that happen and make it available to this Chapala neighborhood as well. Okay, so our next steps are for, again, the Cox and Verizon to continue with the preliminary design. As I mentioned, before we meet with the assessment chair, I'm hoping that we can actually benefit from having that bid for the Cliff Drive undergrounding project, because that will really help us determine an order of magnitude of the cost. Probably be one of the better indicators that we can see. And hopefully if this project does get approved and does go out to bid, it'll be a similar economic climate that we can take advantage of hungry contractors and for very good competition in bidding, and that we could get the project costs reduced to levels that would be favorable to those impacted. So our goal here, or game plan, is to meet again with you in that 2 to 3 months to review the design and to talk about the assessment engineer report. And again, that April 7th council meeting, the purpose of the meeting is to go to the council and give them an update, a status of the underground assessment districts for Chapala Street and Eucalyptus Hill. Eucalyptus Hill is in a very similar stage as your neighborhood, the Chapala neighborhood. And then I do want to talk to the council and ask them for, I'm going to be making a recommendation for what's called the neighborhood threshold of support level. It's something that your district, the Chapala and the Eucalyptus, are exempt from, but for the rest of the program, for the rest of the neighborhoods in the city, if they're starting into the process, my staff's recommendation is for the neighborhoods to have a significant level of support before they initiate one, because again, the city is front-ending the costs, and if ultimately it doesn't get approved, the city doesn't recover those costs. And then during these tougher economical times, we want to be as efficient with the money as we can. And so that's the primary reason for me going to the council on April the 7th. And then, since I'm there, I did want to talk to them about the financial assistance for the program. And some of those benefits may come your way if the council so chooses to pursue that. So this is the time where we can entertain comments and questions. I ask you either to come to the mic or we can pass the mic around if you have any comments or questions, but please come forward or request the mic.
Try not to ask questions just about my property, but some things in general that I guess there's no such thing as a stupid question, is there? Anyway, thanks for this meeting. This is great to get this kind of information. Just some of the questions I had. Is it possible to see this slide with the layout on it, with the purple lines? That was a good one. I'm seeing some lines like right there on Los Olivos, where the line goes significantly outside the boundary. Now, I'm assuming it's going outside the boundary there. Los Olivos is the third street up, right? From Mission, they're right there. So there's some poles in there. Is there a chance that the boundaries are going to be expanded to include those poles and those properties? And I mean, I'm wondering, you talked about the boundaries being a preliminary. Can they grow? Are they going to shrink? Or what are the ways that the boundaries are finally set?
The boundaries may change. Again, the ways the boundaries change are actually three ways that I can remember. First is the neighborhood can change the boundaries. If you're, let's say there's one block of the 6 blocks where the vast majority of the people just want out of the project, you as the neighborhood could say, yeah, we don't have to force them to stay in the project. The neighborhood could decide to either shrink or expand the boundaries based on the neighborhood issues. So you, the neighborhood, could recommend the boundary changes. Second way is the assessment engineer. Now, if for an operational, if for example, on the line you mentioned, if that is an operational need for Edison and they're saying there's no other way that we can do this project and those lines have to come down, well, then the properties adjacent to them will likely receive that special benefit I talked about. If they do, they have to be included into the assessment district. They would be included by the assessment district, I expect, by the assessment engineer, because it's their job to ensure that the state regulations are followed. And Proposition 218 is clear that says, if you receive a special benefit, thou shall be contributing to the project or be part of the project.
We talked about special benefits as if a pole's in your yard and the view is improved, but would these people possibly also go underground with their utilities?
Well, again, if that line outside the district, it means that those service lines or utility poles have to come down, then my expectation, my understanding of the regulations is that they would be included, and those properties that front those lines would likely be included into the district. Okay. And so we'll see how that works out. And I don't know if Tom wants to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Pointer. This not works. Okay, you're talking about this line right here.
But that was the one that...
It's been a couple of months since I've designed the job, but as part of the Rule 20 or the undergrounding job, you have to have the poles either at the boundary or outside the boundary. And there are a couple instances on these side streets where the pole is right at the property line between the property facing Chapala and the property on the side street. So that would be fine. This particular one, I think the pole on the corner was obviously in the district. So we went to the next pole. This is obviously a very shallow lot, and I think there's some driveways in here that prevented a pole from being set. So by definition, would these people be assessed or have a special benefit? That's not for Edison to decide. From a design standpoint, we have to set a pole in a location where we can rise back up with the overhead and have the necessary anchoring behind it and so on and so forth. So I think that is one example of that, just for the driveways. And there's some alleys in here too where we had to avoid. And down here on Constance, the same thing. We trenched to the next pole. There's this area too where the pole here is right on the corner of the driveway to this condominium complex or apartment complex. So we had to move the pole on the other side of the driveway plus another 70 feet or so, because when you stop an overhead line, you have to back it up with an anchor, and that requires a significant lead, a foot, 40 or 50 feet. So you had to move that pole up to take advantage of that. So those are some of the reasons why you'll see these lines outside the boundary.
I want to offer just one other thing. I received an email from Mr. and Mrs. Couch who live here on Los Olivos. And you'll notice the purple line that comes across the area that I've talked to Tom. And even though they weren't included in the initial boundary, they have found out about the project and have approached the city and asked specifically to be included. And so subsequently, we're going to underground them via that connection and then go into their property. But that's another way that, on their request, the boundary was changed.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I'm familiar with the Los Olivos area. If things are going to change and bigger poles and wires and everything, maybe those property owners would like to be included. So, it's
well, sure.
protected.
The other example.
They're going to be assessed because the lines are coming down in front of them anyway.
Yeah, now keep in mind that some of these people are fed from a different source than Chapala. You have De La Vina, that some of these homes are fed from the side streets, so they're not fed from Chapala proper.
That's actually my case, because I'm fed from one of those side streets down an alley, so I don't get my power from Chapala at all, even though my property faces Chapala.
One other thing that we talked about, the original boundary came down and did not include this long lot. I think there's a church or it's an architectural firm there. Well, in order to underground this pole, it feeds overhead to a pole in the very back that feeds, I think, this lot here on Mission. In order to get rid of that pole, you have to underground that line. There's just no other way to do it. So part of my design included undergrounding that one section of line. I don't know about this particular property. Okay. So again, back to John's original point, they give Edison a layout of the boundary, and then I'll walk the job and come up with scenarios like this where we have to lay out a design that works, and there's certain things. So these boundaries will be adjusted a little bit here and there, but again, that's really the city's issue, the assessment engineer's issue. Yes.
I think what we're seeing here is that because the design involved a lot more detail than was known when the initial boundaries were drawn, that we would be talking with other property owners as well as these issues evolve, and to see, and we'll likely have another meeting where we'll find which pole where will things terminate, which pole will remain standing. And so Tom's made his design based on primarily on their operational needs, knowing the project boundaries. And so the end pole issue is subject to change, and as much neighborhood input that we can get at this early stage will be beneficial to determining where exactly the end poles will be. Because again, we're not only talking about Chapala Street, we're talking about the streets that come off of Chapala Street, and there has to be a terminus on every street of where the undergrounding stops. So Those are somewhat fine details, and we'll work with property owners as appropriate to make those determinations. And we'll bring it back to the group to let people know what the key issues are and what decisions will need to be made. And again, if it's a decision that impacts a significant amount of people, we're going to be talking about it openly. But if it's an issue of whose property does a box go on, we're going to probably talk to some individual property owners, because it wouldn't be necessary to involve a larger group for those types of issues. So anyway, the devil is in the details for the design, but we have a very good team to address those issues. So again, we offer that if you have those individual questions, it's a very good time for property owners to be talking to us. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Another question, this is a quick one, I think. The transformer you talked about that are one every block on the south and west side, those go between the curb and the sidewalk, or on the property inside the sidewalk, or where do those actually get put?
When Edison designs its system, they will put the handholds and the splice boxes in Parkway.
Right, which is between the sidewalk and the curb.
Correct, and they'll put the transformers behind sidewalk, because that's where private property. Yes.
Okay. That wasn't clear.
Yeah, and yes, and that's for traffic safety.
Sure. Okay.
and a number of other things.
Then let me lead into my next question. You didn't really talk about the components of the assessment as far as the view, of course, is a consideration, whether you're already undergrounded. I would assume if you have a transformer on your property, maybe you'd get less of an assessment. So I'm wondering if somehow you can talk about how you come up with an assessment. What are the components? How are they weighted when you talk about a property? And and I mentioned a lot of the properties on Chapala are already undergrounded. And does that work into their assessment? If they're already undergrounded to a handhole, when you do this whole project, are they automatically hooked up so they don't have that individual property cost to getting the undergrounding going? Are they just automatically hooked up?
I included in Edison design to pick up the existing underground services. Either a lot of the people that are undergrounded, they come off the pole down to their house, and in many instances there's a box already there.
Right.
So we just ran a conduit to
Right to that box. Good.
And so anyway, to reiterate, if you're already undergrounded, we design the system where you don't have to do anything. We will feed a conduit into your service conduit from the pole or wherever is most convenient. And that was part of the survey, that they showed those underground services. Most of the services, fortunately on this street, there was a box already at the base of the pole. So we just go into the box, and we'll be able to serve the neighbor who is still overhead from that existing box, and that'll be their point of connection. So,
to respond to your question about how definitive does the assessment engineer get to determining the assessment, and I think you mentioned, well, if one property owner has a pole right in front of their property and one may not, is the assessment engineer going to make that distinction? And my understanding is no, that I anticipate, and I'm not an assessment engineer, but I anticipate, knowing what I know about the assessment process, is that generally everyone will be assessed the same, because it is a neighborhood benefit primarily. Whether a pole is in front of your place or not, I would expect your assessments to be the same. When someone sells a property in your neighborhood, it impacts everyone in the neighborhood. And similarly, these assessments are of general nature. So they're general assessments to the neighborhood. That's my understanding. I'm not sure, Jim, you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, and Lisa just reminded me that the next time we meet with you, and we actually can say, each property will be assessed 1 point, or here's a property that will be assessed 1.5 points, that the assessment engineer, Ms. Cox, will be present at that meeting to explain her process in detail.
Okay.
And to answer any questions associated with that. But generally speaking, and Tom, of course, is the expert on this, but generally speaking, there's a pole every other property. If you have a property here, you're going to have a pole on the street, either on, if you're facing this way, either on this property line, okay, or this one, because they go almost every other property line, generally speaking, that they place the pole. So it may not be directly in front of your house, but it's, you know, in close proximity. And I think what Ms. Cox will look at is generally the whole aspect of, as you've seen the picture that John's put up several times, of the wiring over the Chapala. Just the idea is that as you come into this Chapala neighborhood and those wires are gone, it's just more of a, it's aesthetically more pleasing. And sometimes you don't even realize why it is aesthetically more pleasing, but it's just, we have before and after pictures of the Cliff Drive that have been photoshopped, and it's just amazing how much aesthetic,
Right.
just ambiance it adds to it.
Are there considerations given to the transformers being on your property?
You know, Joan would have to address that question. I really don't know. I really couldn't answer for her.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that the city does is we get someone out of, you know, a qualified engineer, but that can look at it from a purely objective standpoint, a purely objective perspective, and based on her experience to make those kind of decisions. But I'd really have to defer that to her. I don't have enough experience with that to be able to answer.
One of the components we talked about in the beginning of this process was the increased reliability of the system. Some people don't even get their power off of this underground system. It comes from behind their property. So I was just wondering what those components were, and if we could list them, and then maybe next meeting is the appropriate time.
No,
We'd like to talk about that at the next meeting.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Elaborate on that more on the next meeting. Thank you for your questions. Anybody else that we can help answer any questions, or if you have any comments, do you mind coming up to, I'm sorry.
I'd like you to discuss what Chapala Street is going to look like during the construction.
Well, the construction will definitely bring the impacts, especially on a corridor such as this, where, you know, it isn't as wide as some of the streets in the city. And so I anticipate that there'll be trenching and plating, a significant amount of trenching and plating. The trenching width isn't going to be overly significant, overly wide. I don't anticipate. But it,
18, 24 inches.
wide? No, it might be it might be 30 to 36 inches wide. Edison's infrastructure requirements to underground this system is pretty significant. The vaults are big. We're going to require conduit banks. And we typically put conduits side by side and then stack them, 2, 2, 2, 2. And then the shade, or the vertical separation between Edison and the other utilities. We mentioned that typically they're on top of us. With this type of project, there might be instances where they have to go beside us. I don't know. That'll all be determined by Verizon's requirements and Cox's requirements. Typically, they're going to be on top of us, though, depending upon.
In generality, what, 36 inches?
I would guess. Back to your question, this is pretty big project, and all the infrastructure will have to go in essentially at once. We can't really stage this, at least from the Edison side. We have to put it all in, and then it's inspected by our division inspectors and approved and ready to go for the Edison crews. And then the Edison crews come in and start their work. They will try to minimize any outages during the cutover to the new system. The details will be worked out in the field by the people in charge of constructing. It's really too complicated to get into that level of detail right now. But typically, the infrastructure goes in, then Edison comes in first and does their work. A month or 2 months or whatever, again, this is all to be determined. And then after Edison comes in, Verizon and Cox come in after us. Now keep in mind that the existing overhead system still must remain in place, because that's how you're getting your service. So this underground system will be put in, but the overhead system has to stay energized until all of you convert your individual homes to the new underground system. Then and only then can Edison start removing its overhead facilities. So there will be, a little bit of lag time, quite a bit of lag time. We're talking about over 100 properties. So the sooner each one of you convert your service to the new system, the sooner we can ultimately remove the poles. A lot of people think it's a very fast process. It really depends on how fast all of you move as an individual homeowner.
Will there be access to every piece of property?
Well, I think yes, of course we have to provide that. There'll be times when, as John said, we will go through a section of Chapala, put our infrastructure in, and then plate it, put steel plates over it, so you can have access. There might be no parking or road closed, for a day or a couple of days, or at night we would open it back up, I suppose. So these are all logistical issues that the contractor that would be awarded the infrastructure bid would work with us on.
Is it kind of a rolling project? In other words, you start at one end and move the other, or is there disruption on the whole street all the time?
That depends.
It's okay. I think one of the things I was wondering about, Tom, was for the main trench from one end of Chapala to the other, what duration can we expect for approximately? Are we talking weeks or months, or what duration for the main trench line? Because obviously there's offshoots from the main. Just to give an order of magnitude, based on the Cliff Drive project, it's going to take months for the Cliff Drive project to have that conduit put in and the cables pulled, etc. The duration of the entire project is probably closer to a year for the entire construction. So I wanted to give you an order of magnitude of how long this could possibly take for that infrastructure to go in. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take months for the trenching, the conduit, the pulling of the new wires, the connections, and one of the last things is your private connections to go down, and the last thing to happen is everything, the new system is operational, and then the poles and the wires, which we're trying to do ultimately, and that's the reason, one of the primary reasons to do it is to get the overhead system down. That's the absolute last thing to come down, and it's in a project of this magnitude, I'm anticipating it's going to be closer to a year before those poles come down from when the project starts. So it's a long project. I don't want to mislead you that it's going to go quick. It's going to take a significant amount of time. And so I was hoping, Tom, that if they're doing the main trench line, that would be done in an expeditious fashion and that traffic would be reinstated generally after hours of construction, and they would minimize the road closures. Obviously, there'll need to be some closures for various reasons, because not only are we running parallel to the curb on Chapala, we're running perpendicular to get the other streets, the adjacent streets. And so we hope to provide more information as we get closer to that stage, but I wanted to let you know some general information so that you can have an order of magnitude. Does that help answer some of your question? Thank you.
May I add to that just a moment? Also, and Tom can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think John or Tommy, the winner, is saying Chapala Street is going to be completely tore up for a year. Because what will happen is the infrastructure they talk about putting in, where the contractor comes in and digs the trench, and they put all the conduits and pole boxes and vaults in place, will occur over a period of maybe 2 to 3 months. But after that, they will close that up, they'll take the plating away, and they will asphalt that. So when Edison comes back to pull their wires, your street will be pretty much contiguous and whole again. And what Edison would do then is they would set up a truck with a wire bank on it at a pull box or a vault, and then they would go some, maybe 800 feet down and then pull in that section of wire. Now, during that portion of the project, there's still some disruption in terms of Edison trucks on the street, but it's not like the whole street is torn up. It's not like a very noisy backhoes and bulldozers and cranes, situation. So it does, after the first 3 months, let's say, after the Aristo conduits are put in place, it does quiet down, and there's still work going on, but it's not nearly as disruptive, over the next 8 months, let's say, as it is that initial time period when the conduits go in. So, but it's construction. You've got to, as John likes to say, you have to break eggs to make an omelet. So.
Well, nobody knows how it's going to be laid out. They might go from one end to the other. They might start in the middle. They'll go block to block. They won't do the main line feeder and then come back and do the other stuff. They'll get in an area and they'll do the work, and then they'll asphalt it, cover it, and then move on. So it depends on who the contractor is and how they want to do it. And please remember that they're working around all of the other utilities that exist in the street, sewer, water, and gas. So sometimes they don't know what they're going to get into until they start digging. And it's construction. So rest assured it won't be closed. We'll plate it every night, and you will have traffic and so on and so forth, but it will be a construction zone for several months.
I think your neighborhood will get a good sense of what you can expect by watching the Cliff Drive project and just seeing how that work progresses. And it's in the neighborhood, it's not far away. So you may want to have a gander at how that progresses, because again, it's a very similar length of project. Very similar project in a lot of ways. Okay. Any other questions?
I was just going to ask, when did that start?
When does the Cliff Drive undergrounding project start? As I mentioned, we're hoping to get out to bid within a month. And then once we get out to bid, it typically takes about 3 months for construction to start, 3 to 4 months. And so we're planning to have construction start, what would that be, end of summer. That's what we're hoping for. Any other questions? If not, I conclude the meeting. Thank you again for your attendance and good questions and being very attentive. And feel free to contact Mr. Bridge. Jim, do you have your number handy?
Yeah, I can give you my telephone number. Also, I have some
For the people who are viewing as well.
And my number is area code 805 729 4629. And let me just repeat that one more time. It's 805 729 4629. And almost any document that the city sends you, for example, this meeting announcement, has my contact information, both my phone number and my email address, at the bottom of that information. So.
And I want to remind all, including the visitors, viewers at home, and that this has been recorded and will be made available at our engineering website, and the website address is www.santabarbaraca.gov, government/departments/engineering division, and on the engineering division page you will find a recording of this meeting. So I conclude the meeting, and thank you very much for coming.